Okay, wonderful. All right, welcome back. Hopefully, you've been on our other couple of calls, but even if you haven't, this is going to give you some really good tactical information about dealing with um, the customer of today or the patron of today as we know them in your world. Let me see if I can get my arrow working here. Okay. Let me see. Pardon me for just a second. I want to make, oh, there we go. All right. Last week I mentioned something called the platinum rule, doing unto others as they would be done unto. You know, most of us filter the way that we offer service through our own sensibilities and our own lived experiences. So the platinum rule is really asking us to put ourselves truly in their shoes, not just presuming that they have the same wants and needs as we do. This is one of my favorite sayings because so much of the time we treat lapses in customer service as something that, we almost don't expect it to happen again. But the road to success is paved with mistakes well handled. We can just presume that we are going to be dealing with mistakes and errors. That's fine. The question is not whether they're going to happen, but what we're going to do when they happen. It's really important to remember every patron, every person is holding one of these, the me sign. It is all about them. And they are constantly asking themselves, what's in it for me? How are you going to take care of me? And we're all like this when we're customers, right? We're all like this when we're patrons. It is all about us. And I think right now that me sign is just flashing bright because everybody is super stressed right now. So those me signs, when people are stressed, those me signs get bigger. Dealing with complaints is an opportunity. There's a wonderful book that is in the resources called A Complaint is a Gift by Janelle Barlow, which I think is just probably the best book ever on this subject. Remember that when someone complains, they are just the tip of the iceberg of people who have a similar issue. Most people, 96% of people, are not going to complain. So it's easy to just dismiss complainers as cranks sometimes, but the complainer is speaking for others who are not going to take that social risk. We all know this, unhappiness is contagious, and online reviews and conversations make this even more so. Unhappy patrons, this is a pre-online review statistic. So I think it's probably even worse than this. Unhappy patrons are 3 times more likely to share an experience than happy patrons are. So while a library is going to have a somewhat different posture with respect to unhappy patrons than, say, a business who, is forced to give refunds and do those kinds of customer service athletics. Ultimately, we are still in that same position. This affects us. This affects the community's perception of us. It probably affects funding and other things. So having happy patrons is obviously extremely important to us. Unhappy patrons are frightening. And in some of the information on the survey, this is just reinforces dealing with someone who's upset or yelling is really scary. And studies have shown it truly is scary. It is equivalent of a life-threatening experience as far as our own biochemistry is concerned. You are getting a massive surge of those stress hormones when you're dealing with someone who's upset, who's yelling, and even they don't have to yell for this experience to happen to us. So, I totally honor the fact that being on the front lines can be a really frightening experience. And even the business I used to run, a spa, a luxury spa, we still had people who dealt with us like this that we had to make happy. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about abusive versus angry customers because there is a difference. So, complaint resolution, service recovery, as we call it in the customer service biz, there's a real structure to it. There is actually protocol that's been developed Because unhappy people do things very similarly. We may feel like every time we encounter someone who's unhappy, we're dealing with a different situation because of what may have precipitated their unhappiness. But unhappy people behave in very predictable ways in a public setting and in dealing with a business. So the 5 steps we've got to go through are, we've got to be aware and we've got to anticipate. So prevention is really key. The more aware you are, the more you anticipate potential problems, the less severe those issues can be. So I would always tell my staff, when you hope for the best, you get the worst. You do not want to have your head in the sand. So be aware of the signs of someone being frustrated, unhappy, etc. The second is to acknowledge and apologize. The third is to do something which I call allow. We're going to talk about that when we talk about venting. Finally, we get to affirmation, which is basically acknowledging the problem, and then amends, figuring out how to solve the problem. So they're all A's. That's why we have amends. Awareness. This is your ounce of prevention. Look for trouble. Part of this is just patrolling and being on top of what's going on. Now, I don't know if changes are making it less likely that people are going to be inside your building, but be looking for signs of trouble. And then ask specific questions. If you're eating at a restaurant and a waitress comes up to your table and says, "How's everything?" Do you ever really answer that question honestly? Most of us don't, because it does not sound like they want an answer. So avoid general questions and yes/no questions, like, "You finding everything okay?" versus, "What can I help you find?" Those are very different kinds of questions. So specific questions help you pinpoint issues. And then also you want to make it really easy and low risk to complain. You want to make complaining not the social risk that it is for people. This is why 96% of people don't complain, is it's too big a social risk. Unfortunately, they're going to go and commiserate with their friends and tell other people. But when it comes to actually presenting the problem to you, the person who potentially can solve it, they are not going to be as generous, if you will. Really important that your patrons know that you're on their side. And this is an expression that comes from a book that's also in this reading list we put together by Danny Meyer, who is a very famous restaurateur who started a group of restaurants in New York City and actually is the founder of Shake Shack, of all things. When they know you're on their side, it's because you are acting as an agent, not a gatekeeper. Gatekeepers are all about enforcing rules, and agents are all about solving problems and helping people get what they need. So it's really important, just in the way, and we've talked about, how these nonverbal aspects of communication are so important. Everything that you do, and from your voice tonality to the way that you situate yourself physically, communicates nonverbally, whether you're on their side or whether you're a gatekeeper. If someone is sharing a problem with you, it's really important to acknowledge that problem and its impact on the person. Usually when someone brings something to your attention, the main motivation is they want you to be aware of the issue. They're bringing it to your attention. And that's often because they don't want it to happen again, not just to themselves, but to other people too. It's also really important to not downplay or correct someone's reaction. Saying something like, "It's no big deal," "There's no reason to be upset." These things are not soothing to an unhappy person. They are gasoline on the fire of unhappiness. So make sure that you're not correcting them or minimizing them. And then apologize. It's free. "I'm sorry this was such a frustrating experience. I apologize if we dropped the ball." Apologies are the most important thing. And the other technique that I used is thanking people, thanking them for giving the feedback. I would always say things like, "Thank you. It is very generous of you to let us know. A lot of people would have gone away mad." Thanking people instantly disarms them. No one expects to be thanked for complaining. Apologies are not excuses. So this is really important. We, being inside the system, want to explain what happened. We want to explain why this thing went wrong or went off the rails. The patron wants a solution. They are not interested in an explanation. They're not interested in justification. So don't play the blame game. You really want to avoid being in a position of scapegoating someone who's working with you, like, well, she was supposed to put that on hold and she did. That doesn't work. And then do your best not to get defensive. It is so not about you, but it feels personal when you have someone who's upset in your space. And then never try to win an argument with a patron. You are always going to lose. There's simply no way. And one of my friends who's a fabulous customer service trainer, her book, Neon Signs of Service, is also in your resources. She has an expression, which I think is probably one of the best operating mottos for life, which is, being right is the booby prize. Okay, now we want to allow them to complain. Sometimes that's awkward, where they decide to make their complaint may not be the optimal place. So I'm always trying to find a safe space for that complainer to vent. And usually, unless they want to make a scene, some people do, they will accept your invitation to move venues a little bit. The way I always phrase it was, this is so important. I want to give you my full attention. Can we step over here and talk? So getting them out of the flow or the fray can be helpful. It's not always going to be possible, but whenever possible, letting them know you want to do this, not because you are afraid of what they're going to say, but because you want to give them your full attention. Okay, this is the most important part of this whole webinar, which is how to deal with someone who's venting. Venting follows a very specific process. Venting ends eventually. So when someone starts going off on you and starts rah-rah-rah-rahing, know that it will end, because it is venting. It is releasing pressure. So what you want to do during this venting time, and I like to visualize it almost like a volcano, when you are on the upslope and they are venting, they may actually sound like they're getting madder and madder. Important to note, they are not. They are letting off steam, but they sometimes get more worked up while they're doing this. Okay, take a deep breath, relax. You don't want to disengage, but you don't need to engage at this point. In fact, engaging at this point can actually interrupt them, and they're going to start their whole story all over again. So it's about active listening at this phase, sympathetic sounds like, aha, I see, and phrases like that. But you do not want to problem solve at this point. Even if you know how to solve the problem, even if it seems like a pretty simple fix, if you interrupt them, the venting volcano is just going to build up more steam. So there is something that always happens when people complain and go on a rant. They're going to go, they sigh. They let out a sigh. When you hear the sigh, that is your cue to start problem solving with them. That's your cue that it's time to move on to the other side of the volcano. That's when the pressure, the intensity starts to alleviate, it starts to go downhill. So when you listen for the sigh, it actually almost becomes funny, because people are extremely predictable in the way that they do this. So that is your cue. Okay, let's talk about abusive people versus upset people. Abusive patrons want to screw up other people's experience. That's their goal. They want to be disruptive, they want to make a scene, and they do not want to be helped. You can tell an abusive patron because they don't go through this venting volcano pattern. They just keep going and going and going. And they tend to use excessive profanity. I mean, upset customers may use a little bit of profanity, but an abusive patron is going to use a lot of profanity. They may issue threats. That's how they operate. They are not interested in a solution at this point. Now, I think given the stress that a lot of people are under, people can be a bit more explosive right now, but they are still following that volcano pattern. What precipitates them may be less extreme, but the volcano pattern is still going to be followed. The abusive patron's not going to follow that. And I did see in the survey responses that someone did a very good response with someone who was abusive with them on the phone. And this is how you handle the abusive customer. It is, if you continue to speak to me in this manner, I will have to end our conversation. Out of consideration for our other patrons, I must ask you to leave. This is when it's okay to do this. So, presuming that you do not have an abusive, but merely a garden variety unhappy person, it's time to problem solve. Even with a situation as simple as, we'd like you to wear a mask, and the customer's upset about that, you can follow that same complaint resolution protocol, wherein you let the person do some venting. They need to tell you how they feel. And then after that, you have the opportunity to problem solve. Clarify the information situation. Now is the time when you get into the more detailed questions. When you said this, did you mean this? You just get clarity. This is time to get the deeper understanding of the situation. You have won this opportunity by listening to them. And by listening to them, they are going to open their ears to you when you begin to offer solutions. And this is something that I recommend saying to people by way of expressing what you're going to do for them. I'm going to do everything in my power to make this right for you. There's two pieces to that sentence that are really important. I'm going to do everything in my power means you don't have unlimited power. I'm going to do everything in my power, right? It doesn't mean that you can wave a magic wand and make the whole situation go away, but I'm going to do everything in my power to make this right for you, okay? That is not a specific promise. This is more a statement of intention, but it is a really good way to express to a patron that you are sincere in your desire to solve the problem. Now, you know, a situation like someone who does not want to wear a mask, that's a very specific kind of problem. And the fact that it is a specific and repetitive problem gives us the opportunity to develop an approach. And it sounds like most of you have developed an approach about that. But telling someone, I want to make this right for you, is a human expression of empathy. And that's really, really important. You will not be able to solve every problem to someone's satisfaction, but if they know that you sincerely tried, you sincerely listened, that is as much as we can ask. Okay, if we have the opportunity to make amends, obviously in the business that I was in, this was really different because people were paying us and we had to deal with the whole issue of refunds, and money, of course, complicates the relationship pretty dramatically. But you're still going to be in a position where you may have to make some sort of amends. What's very important at this stage is to project confidence and competence as you do this. You want them to know that you understand what happened. Again, most people complain or bringing something to your attention without any intention of personal gain. They just want you to know that it wasn't right and that you need to fix it. So at this stage, making amends, also you want to make sure that they understand that you are capable of solving the problem. Offer your solution quickly. Delays increase frustration. So the longer someone has to wait to get a solution to their problem, the more potential frustration, anger is going to build. And it's very important to empower team members to resolve most issues without having to escalate to a manager or a supervisor. And I'm sure there are predictable issues where you can develop protocols to enable people to do just that. Super important that everyone feels confident and competent in dealing with unhappy patrons. Okay, we've got 7 minutes for questions. So I'd love to field some. We have a situation where questions. Are there any places where you've gotten stuck in the last couple of months?
Hey, Peggy, this is Forrest.
Hey,
Um,
Forrest.
I don't have a specific question, but I just got to, I really like the way you phrased the agent versus gatekeeper. And that was, I think sometimes, we get in the situation and we have some employees that, are really love the policy.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
they love to say no, or that, I guess that goes back to the librarian with a tight bun who's going around shushing everybody, and it really does make a big difference, because I think when somebody in that situation and they're upset, they could give two hoots about your policy. They want a solution to
Absolutely.
their problem. So I really
Absolutely.
like that phrase.
Yeah, and policy is a hot button word for people. Protocol was a word that we used a lot rather than policy, because it just didn't sound quite as, the other thing is, this all goes back to social style. So if you are a social risk taker, like a driver or an expressive social style, you're going to have a lot easier time dealing with unhappy patrons. If you are not a social risk taker, if you fall into more the amiable or analytical camp, this is going to be harder for you, because complaining and dealing with a complaining person is all about social risk. It is like social risk writ large. So be aware how your social style is informing that. And of course, library sciences, it's science, it's order, it's protocols, it's procedures. It is that kind of, again, I said this last time, the Dewey Decimal System. It is about systems. So it is much more likely that a library's natural sort of default is going to be to more of gatekeeper, right? It is about dealing with the public and making sure that they behave, and that, not disturbing others, returning materials on time. It is all about that. So it is a very different stance. It's a different posture to be in. But it is super important. And even in, high touch customer businesses, you find agents, the hostess at the popular restaurant who's, wants to know what time your reservation is, and, oh, you're late. That's gatekeeper behavior. Are there any other scenarios that have come up? Obviously the mask situation was mentioned a lot in the feedback on surveys. Hopefully patrons are getting a little more cooperative about that, but I do expect that that's going to be a situation you'll be confronting for a while. And having some ideas, role plays, great way to practice responding, because fake anger in a role play is almost as effective at kind of taking you there mentally and emotionally as the real thing. So good to practice that with each other.
Excellent. Do we have any other questions or comments? Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Peggy. We really appreciate all you've done, and it's been very interesting these last 3 weeks. And I know I've been taking this back to my staff, and it really does, I think, bode well. And it is important to say that right now our the staff is very nervous and frustrated, and everything that's going on with COVID, we're talking about the customers coming in and their frustration, but I know the staff is frustrated, and we know the budgets are coming up, and and it's important, I think, to have them reiterate that we know you're stressed, and we know that there's home and things like that, but when we come in and we're working in the library, still the customers are our number one focus in that round. But it's a tough situation all the way around. So we appreciate it, and any tools that we can take back to our teams and help is very much appreciated. So thank you.
Good. Well, if anybody has any questions or scenarios they want to run by me after the fact, I'm happy to do that. So please feel free to reach out if you want to shoot me an email. Ask for some ideas or pick my brain about something. I'm happy to talk.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.